Moon. That spells Stephen King's masterpiece. The Stand, see, it's not just a big novel. It's the big novel. King has even called it his great American novel. And that's not just hype, it's intention. He was aiming to write something with real scope, real mythic heft. And right from the start, we need to understand this isn't just horror or apocalypse. It's a sprawling blend of genres, part epic fantasy, part political thriller, part road novel, and deeply steeped in spiritual allegory. It's a canvas broad enough to capture the American psyche in crisis, digging into national anxieties and maybe even buried Puritan roots. Let's rewind to the origin story, which, like the book itself, is layered, sprawling, and just a little bit haunted. See, back in the late 60s, King had this ambitious idea. He wanted to write an epic, something in the spirit of The Lord of the Rings, but grounded in modern American life. He just wasn't sure exactly how to approach it. That wasn't until one night in the mid-70s. King was watching 60 Minutes with his family in Boulder, Colorado, when a segment on biological warfare aired, and suddenly, it all clicked. From that dark seed grew one of King's most iconic works. But that click wasn't just creative inspiration. It tapped directly into a core theme: the horror of technology escaping human control and the catastrophic failure of the government that created it. And let's be clear, The Stand is very critical of the government and its roles in our lives. As King put it in a 1985 interview, "I think the government stinks. I believe what I wrote in The Stand. It always ends in one way. It's like taking dope or booze. You take enough government, and it's going to kill you. That's the end. Sooner or later, it always goes down." This fear permeates the novel. The superflu, a government-engineered pandemic, becomes the ultimate symbol of our own ingenuity turning monstrously against us. It's King cutting the Gordian knot and using the plague as a brutal, almost disturbingly satisfying way to wipe clean the slate of just intractable modern problems like pollution, political division, and the Cold War arms race. Now, this wasn't just a random fear King plucked from the air. This was a cultural flashpoint. We're talking post-Vietnam, post-Watergate America, a nation suspicious of its institutions, wounded by political betrayal, and obsessed with the threat of total collapse. That pervasive mistrust isn't just background color in The Stand. It's King's potent critique of those very institutions. King wasn't just reflecting the paranoia. He was weaponizing it. What King produced wasn't just a novel about a superflu. It was a modern American myth. Not a myth in the sense of something untrue, but myth as in mythos, a story that encodes a culture's deepest fears, desires, and self-understandings. It explores what America thinks it is versus what it fears it might become. In that light, The Stand becomes less about Captain Trips and more about the spiritual consequences of societal collapse. It's about what happens when the scaffolding of civilization crumbles and how the human spirit responds. The novel is a biblical epic in disguise. It's a tale of exodus and temptation, prophecy and revelation. Think Revelation by way of Route 66. This is a novel steeped in the iconography of Americana. We have cornfields and highways, old women with Bibles, dark men with cowboy boots. It even taps into frontier mythology of journeys west and rebuilding. But it's also a novel that questions American exceptionalism. The government doesn't just fail in The Stand. It engineers its end. Project Blue, the military program that births Captain Trips, is the thing that ends the world. This is King's America circa 1978. A place where trust in leadership is a joke, where conspiracy isn't a theory but a narrative device, and where the apocalypse is not an alien invasion, it's an inside job. In fact, the early chapters of The Stand echo the real-life paranoia of the Cold War and biological weapons research. King reportedly read about the 1969 outbreak of the Dungway Proving Ground in Utah, where a military test accidentally killed thousands of sheep. And that incident planted the idea that the US government could, and likely would, let a weapon loose, intentionally or not. That's the dread underlying the first act of The Stand. Not that nature will kill us, but that we'll kill ourselves in our own ingenuity. Now let's talk a bit about publication history, because The Stand has one of the most famous edits in publishing lore. King's original manuscript was massive, something like 1,200 pages. His publisher, Doubleday, they freaked out. Paper costs were high, the market just didn't support doorstoppers from genre writers in 1978. So King reluctantly cut 400 pages. That version, the first edition, was published in hardcover with a timeline set in 1980. But the novel kept growing in cultural stature. By 1990, King had enough clout to release The Stand, the uncut and complete edition, restoring much of the original material and updating the cultural references to the late 80s. Now, this is the version most of us know and love. It's the one that's in print today, and it's the one that I'll be referring to throughout this video. And just for completionists, in between the 1978 original and the 1990 uncut edition, there was a 1980 paperback re-release that tweaked the timeline forward 5 years. So really there are 3 versions of The Stand, but the one you probably own, the brick with the new afterword, is the uncut edition. That's King's definitive edition. Since its release, The Stand has become one of the most influential novels in modern speculative fiction. Critics love it, fans adore it, and creators across genres, from novelists to game designers, cite it as a touchstone. The novel's mix of spiritual gravitas and the character intimacy has made it a model for apocalypse storytelling ever since. If you've watched The Walking Dead, Station 11, The Last of Us, or hell, even Lost, you've seen The Stand's DNA at work. Of course, its impact led to multiple adaptations. The most beloved is probably the 1994 ABC miniseries starring Gary Sinise, Molly Ringwald, and Rob Lowe. It had a strong cast, a fairly faithful script, and that very specific 90s TV movie charm. Then in 2020, CBS All Access released a new adaptation featuring Alexander Skarsgård as Flagg and Whoopi Goldberg as Mother Abagail. That one was, let's call it, polarizing. It took a non-linear approach, added some new scenes, and made some controversial character choices. It just, yeah, let's say fans pretty much rejected it. But even the uneven adaptations, they underscore something important. The Stand refuses to go away. It lingers and haunts. It taps into something foundational. That's what makes it more than a story about a plague. It's a mythic reckoning dressed up in Levi's and denim jackets. It's the American epic. Flawed, massive, soulful, and scared of its own reflection. And now that we've set the stage, let's step into the world it builds, into the wasteland and the crossroads, the dreams and the dread. Let's talk about what this novel is really about. Now guys, if you're going to continue with this video, which you totally should, by the way, just know that I am going into spoiler territory throughout the remainder of the video. The Stand is Stephen King's apocalyptic epic. It's a sprawling tale of plague, prophecy, and the primal battle between good and evil. Although neither of the two main factions should be placed into such strict and defined classifications. And let's be clear, this isn't just an end-of-the-world story. This is America's myth of Armageddon, rebuilt from the bones of horror, fantasy, and political satire. This is the Book of Revelation, rewritten by a guy who drinks Miller Lite and plays Leonard Skinner at full volume while he writes. The inciting catastrophe is a government-engineered superflu known as Captain Trips, a bioweapon developed in secret and accidentally released. Because of course it is. From there, the disease spreads like a biblical judgment, wiping out 99.4% of the global population in a matter of weeks. But unlike your typical plague narrative, King isn't here for epidemiology or pandemic politics. The flu is just the doorway. The real story begins after the collapse. What's left behind is the silence. Empty highways, decaying suburbs, corpses slumped in cars, malls, and church pews. And scattered across this new wasteland are the immune. The lucky, or I guess the unlucky few, who, for reasons unknown, survive. And here's where things take a turn towards the mythic. The survivors, they begin to dream, but not just any dreams, prophetic dreams, night after night, pulling them toward two polar opposites. Mother Abagail, a 108-year-old black woman in Nebraska who seemingly speaks directly with God, and Randall Flagg, the dark man, the walking dude, who is gathering the wicked in Las Vegas. And these dreams aren't metaphors either. They're invitations. They're calls to allegiance. And King isn't subtle about it. This is a spiritual war being fought on the ruins of civilization. But crucially, the Stand complicates this simple dichotomy. Mother Abagail isn't a flawless saint. She grapples with pride and fear. Flagg isn't just a cackling demon. He's seductive, charismatic, and actually quite reasonable in his appeal to order and strength. More importantly, the real battle isn't just between these two figures, but within the hearts of the survivors themselves. Under Mother Abagail's guidance, drawn by those dreams of cornfields and hymns, one group begins to coalesce in Boulder, Colorado. Here we see the first model of societal reconstruction. They attempt to rebuild society based on the old American ideals: democracy, community, and cooperation. They form committees, restart the power grid, and hold town meetings. But King portrays this free zone not as a utopia, but as inherently messy and fragile. Paranoia creeps in. Old political habits resurface. There's bureaucracy, infighting, even espionage. It's a painful look at how difficult, maybe even flawed, the good way of organizing humanity truly is. Even when starting over, the dirty politics of the old world return. On the other side of the Rockies in Las Vegas, Flagg builds something different. See, Flagg's Vegas is clean, orderly, and technologically functional. The lights stay on, people have jobs, there's a clear hierarchy. But this order is built on fear, absolute loyalty, brutal punishments, and constant surveillance. Flagg doesn't offer freedom. He offers certainty and power in exchange for obedience. He appeals to the desire for a strong hand and for someone to just take charge after the chaos. Flagg is the embodiment of entropy, seduction, and totalitarianism. He isn't just a villain. He's chaos made charismatic. He's the smiling face of fascism, the seductive whisper that says, "Just do as I say and you'll be safe." He isn't Satan, but as Mother Abagail points out, he and Satan know of each other and have kept their counsels together of old. And Mother Abagail? She's not God as some have read, but she is a representation of faith, flawed, frail, and scared, but also righteous in her conviction. So you have these two cities, these two leaders, these two opposing philosophies battling for the soul of the future. But while this epic conflict provides the backdrop, King makes it clear that the real story, the driving force of the novel, lies in the people. This is where The Stand truly transcends the typical apocalypse narrative. It becomes about the individual journeys, the moral struggles, and the critical choices made by ordinary, flawed people caught between these cosmic forces. Are they merely pawns in a game between God and Flagg, or do they possess free will? Can they shape their own destiny, or are they bound by the prophetic dreams in their own internal darkness? Characters like Larry Underwood, the self-absorbed musician haunted by his past, Harold Lauder, the resentful outcast whose brilliance curdles into evil, and Nadine Cross, the woman seemingly fated for darkness. Their struggles with temptation, guilt, redemption, and sacrifice are the beating heart of the book. Their choices, often painful and ambiguous, determine not just their own fates, but the direction of this new world. What begins as survival slowly morphs into continental pilgrimage. Characters cross the broken country on foot, guided by dreams and visions, not unlike prophets and apostles. The spiritual overtone is explicit. The Stand isn't just inspired by The Lord of the Rings. It is a version of that story reshaped for post-industrial America. Instead of elves and hobbits, we get janitors, rock stars, and pregnant women and petty criminals. Instead of the Shire and Mordor, we get Boulder and Vegas. And instead of Frodo's burden, we get the burden of memory, morality, and faith. So, what is the stand really about? It's about choice, about we build after the fall, about the moral and spiritual scaffolding that remains when the institutions collapse. It's about how people, broken, scared, ordinary people, can still choose compassion, sacrifice, and faith over fear, power, and vengeance. It's about apocalypse, not as spectacle, but as a crucible. It's about good versus evil, yes, but also about ambiguity, contradiction, and the painfully human path toward redemption. And at its core, The Stand is a deeply American novel. From its road trip structure to its fascination with guns, liberty, and individual choice, it's a story forged in the American imagination, built on the ashes of manifest destiny and burned out gas stations. And yet it still dares to ask, even now, can we still choose good? So is The Stand actually good? Yeah, it absolutely is. But good doesn't quite cut it here. The Stand isn't just a book you enjoy. It's a book that gets its hands on your soul. And depending on how you're wired, it'll either become a lifelong favorite or just a literary wilderness you respect from a distance. Now, if you're the latter, you're not alone. I've met plenty of others who have tried The Stand. They understand its importance, but it's clearly not for them. You can't discuss how great this novel is and not start with the obvious. The characters. They are just so well written here. This is King at the absolute height of his people writing powers. The man doesn't write characters so much as builds them. Bone by bone, memory by memory, until they walk off the page and into your living room. Every choice they make, every fear they confront, every petty or noble gesture, it all rings true. It's intimate, messy, and alive. Let's start with Stu Redman, our Western hero, King's answer to Gary Cooper or Alan Ladd. He doesn't seek leadership, but leadership seeks him. He's not verbose or flashy, and he sure as hell isn't reckless. What he is, though, is steady. In a novel full of eccentric, flamboyant, or tormented characters, Stu is an anchor of consistency. Ed Caspier in A Casebook on the Stand really gets at Stu's evolving archetypal nature. He sees him starting out as almost a classic cowboy figure, a kind of Ulysses setting out on an unexpected journey and ultimately developing into something more foundational for the new world. As Caspier puts it, Stu begins as Ulysses, becomes Remus, and ends as Adam. That progression from wanderer to builder to, in a sense, the first man of a new era is a powerful way to see his journey. He isn't the smartest or the most charismatic, but when it comes to surviving the end of the world, he is exactly who you want on your side. It's easy to think of him as the last honest man in a dishonest world. Stu, he's the epistemological center of The Stand. He functions as the character whose quiet strength and stoic sensibility ground the novel's metaphysical and ethical tensions. There's also a brilliant subtlety to how Stu's humility sets the tone for the entire boulder-free zone. He doesn't try to dominate conversations or impose visions. But when he speaks, people listen because they recognize something real and decent. And that decency never comes across as naive. He's been through it. He's seen death, disease, and despair. And he doesn't blink. Stu embodies a kind of old school masculinity, and it's a deliberate counterbalance to characters like Harold Lauder or Randall Flagg. Stu's refusal to indulge in the trappings of power makes him worthy of leadership. He's a man who understands that in a world cracked open by the plague and madness, restraint is its own kind of heroism. And his relationship with Frannie is one of the greatest emotional anchors of the book. The way he embraces her unborn child like it's his own is beautiful. That level of compassion can be felt off the page. And again, it further separates him from most of the other men in The Stand. Mary Farr, an essayist and scholar, even paints him as this new Adam, tasked alongside Frannie's Eve with the monumental job of trying to replenish the earth, and hopefully not make the same old mistakes. And when the story pivots towards divine intervention, when Mother Abagail sends the men west on their fatal mission, Stu becomes the narrative's embodiment of endurance. He's the one who doesn't die. Not because he's chosen in the same way others are, but because he chooses to keep going. He limps back from the ruins of Las Vegas like some grizzled Odysseus, not triumphant, but alive. Stu's survival feels like a reward for loyalty, integrity, and the ability to put others first. In a cast full of saints, sinners, prophets, and monsters, Stu Redman is just a man. And that, in King's hands, makes him something so much more. And speaking of Frannie Goldsmith, her opening chapters are tragic, but they set up a beautiful arc over the course of the novel. For some reason, Frannie gets a lot of hate. And for the life of me, I don't understand why. So I'm going to take a moment to unpack Frannie a bit. On the surface, Frannie, she might come across as soft, maybe even a little flaky. She giggles under stress and she fumbles emotionally. But if you dig deeper, you'll see that King has quietly written one of the most psychologically rich characters in the book. Frannie was raised by a kind father, the sort of man who indulged her and let her be herself. But behind that domestic warmth lurks something colder. A mother who seemed to loathe her, and who might have turned physically abusive if she thought she could get away with it. Frannie's mother wants her silenced, unseen, and erased, and her father, for all his kindness, mostly allows it to happen. Frannie grows up in this emotional pressure cooker, learning to mask her discomfort, to smooth things over, to giggle when she's unraveling. She ends up with a boyfriend who, when angered, lashes out and hits her. And she knows what this means because she's seen that behavior before. She's drawn into a pattern that echoes her home life. She endures abuse, she seeks comfort from someone passive, and repeat. When the world ends, she's still trying to carry the burden alone. She nurses her father as he dies. Then she's left with Harold, socially awkward, insecure, and belittling. At first, he seems manageable, familiar even, but we all know what Harold becomes. Then she meets Stu, and at first glance, Stu seems like her father. A kind, calm man. But the difference is crucial. Stu doesn't just stand by. There's a moment, it's subtle, maybe easy to overlook, where Stu, he reflects on his past, remembering times when he didn't speak up, when he looked away. And this haunts him. And that's the pivot. Frannie sees in Stu not just comfort, but potential growth. Not someone who enables harm, but someone who might finally stop it. And that's why their relationship works. Not because it's perfect, but because it's healing. Frannie and Stu's bond is one of, if not the only example of a healthy sexual relationship in The Stand. This isn't just a romantic subplot. In a novel where sexuality often mirrors moral corruption, their connection stands out as a kind of sanctuary, a partnership built on care that starkly contrasts with the manipulative or destructive relationships we see in Flagg's camp or with Larry Underwood. Frannie isn't just the girl in the story. She's a survivor of quiet domestic warfare long before Captain Trips ever breaks out. And her arc, from passive participant in her own life to someone who chooses fiercely and deliberately to build a future with Stu, is one of the most quietly powerful evolutions in the entire novel. She's one of the few characters whose arc doesn't revolve around power or prophecy. Instead, she navigates intimacy, trust, and self-worth in the aftermath of trauma. Her arc is about choosing life, literally and metaphorically, and King gives her the final chapter for a reason. If Stu is the new Adam and Frannie the new Eve, then her pregnancy, therefore, isn't just personal. It's deeply symbolic. It represents the fragile hope of humanity's continuation, central to the theme of rebuilding a shattered world. In a novel dominated by men and messiahs, Frannie reminds us what the story is really about. Continuity, birth, and hope. The long, hard work of rebuilding. And what about Nick Andros? He's deaf and mute, and yet he sees people more clearly than anyone else in the novel. Nick understands not through words, but through presence, attentiveness, and an empathy that feels earned rather than performed. From the moment we meet him, beaten half to death by a group of drunk townies in Arkansas, Nick radiates a kind of internal clarity. He's calm under pressure, cautious but brave, emotionally intelligent, and relentlessly fair. He doesn't just survive the collapse of society, he begins to lead in its wake, and not through charisma or prophecy, but through principle. Nick is the first person to truly recognize Tom Cullen's value. Where others might dismiss or patronize Tom, Nick connects, builds a friendship, and trusts him. That bond becomes one of the most beautiful and consequential relationships in the entire novel, and is almost entirely wordless. Nick is a new model of leadership, one rooted in service rather than dominance. He contrasts sharply with figures like Flagg, who seduce and control, and even with the Belder Free Zone's bureaucrats, who wrangle and debate. Nick leads by example, and that's exactly why people follow him. His arc builds with such quiet power that when he dies, it lands like a gut punch. And it's off screen. That's the part that sticks with you. Nick doesn't die in battle, and we don't get any last words. He dies in a sudden explosion. He's a victim of Harold and Nadine's betrayal. It's a cruel fate for someone so fair. But it's why it's so emotional. And that choice, that's King doing what he does best. Subverting the arc we want in favor for the truth we need. We're denied the heroic sacrifice, the final confrontation, the moment of triumph. Because Nick's arc was never about victory. It was about impact. And when he's gone, you feel the hole he leaves behind. Especially in Tom Cullen, who carries Nick's memory all the way back from Vegas like a spiritual heir. Nick is a kind of moral archetype, a figure of resistance without violence. He dies early, or, relatively speaking for a novel that's 1,200 pages, because his role isn't to act in the climax. It's to inspire the others to carry on without him. That's why his death doesn't feel like a narrative cheat. It feels like a test. King removes the moral clarity Nick offers, then watches how everyone else responds. Tom steps up, Larry grows, and the free zone changes. Nick doesn't get a resurrection. He doesn't get a final vision. What he gets is legacy, which, in a world where Flagg is promising shortcuts and spectacle, is very impactful. He is the embodiment of quiet courage. A leader who never speaks, and yet whose absence speaks volumes. Moon. That spells one of the most genuinely moving characters Stephen King has ever written. On the surface, Tom Cullen seems simple. He's cognitively disabled, slow to understand danger, and prone to repetition. But if you've read The Stand more than once, you already know, man, Tom, he hits harder the second time around. Because once the dust settles on all the epic showdowns and the spiritual prophecies, you realize something kind of incredible. Tom Cullen might just be the most purely good person in the book. He's not a symbol of innocence. He's a symbol of uncomplicated grace. He doesn't posture. He doesn't seek power. He doesn't pretend to know more than he does. He simply listens to dreams, to people, to the little voice inside that tells him right from wrong. And in a novel full of people trying to remake themselves, Tom doesn't change. He simply endures. Tom represents the wisdom of the spirit over the intellect. As Michael A. Morrison highlights in his essay, Tom operates through a kind of impossible knowledge, possessing powers that reach far beyond rationality, such as intuition, empathy, and maybe even a direct line to the divine that bypasses the noisy logic the modern world prizes so highly. And that's a big deal in a novel where the apocalypse itself is born from overconfidence in technology. The men who built Captain Trips were geniuses, just not good ones. Tom, by contrast, isn't educated, but he's true. He trusts the dreams of Mother Abagail. He forms a deep bond with Nick Andros, a man who, like Tom, lives outside the margins of normal communication. And when Nick dies, it's Tom who carries his legacy, who walks into the heart of the enemy territory and risks everything. Tom Cullen is underestimated by everyone except the people who matter. He's the ultimate counterpoint to Flagg's world of hierarchy, strength, and fear. While Flagg's Vegas is built on surveillance and brutality, Tom walks through it as a silent witness. And let's talk about that walk back. After the hand of God obliterates Vegas, Stu Redman is left broken and alone. But Tom, sweet stuttering Tom, finds him. And not only that, he saves him, pulls him through the mountains, tends to his wounds, keeps him alive. He's not strong, he's not fast, he's not clever, but he is faithful. And that's what survives. There's this moment during the journey back to Boulder where Tom is talking to God, out loud, casual, like he's chatting with a friend. And you realize he's not hallucinating. He believes. And maybe even more than that, he's heard. In the novel about dreams and prophecy, Tom is the only one who never doubts, not because he understands everything, but because his heart is clear. He doesn't need signs or sermons. He just needs the truth to feel right. Tom Cullen functions as a Christ-like figure, though not in a self-sacrificing way we usually see in that archetype. Instead, Tom embodies a kind of sacred humility, a spiritual resilience that resists spectacle. He saves the hero, survives the ordeal, and then fades gently into the background without asking for recognition. And that's what makes him unforgettable. Because when the smoke clears and the world begins again, we remember Flagg's grin, we remember Harold's bomb, we remember Larry's walk into the fire. But we also remember Tom. Larry Underwood, the pop star, the sinner, the son, the pilgrim. Out of the novel's massive ensemble, Larry's arc might be the most quietly profound, because he doesn't start as a hero. He starts as a narcissist. A grinning, insecure, almost likable opportunist who stumbles into the apocalypse the same way he stumbles into a record deal, with more ambition than ethics. He's riding high off a one-hit wonder, Baby, Can You Dig Your Man? A song that becomes an eerie anthem of survival after Captain Trips sweeps across the globe. But King doesn't romanticize him. Larry's first chapters are some of the most uncomfortable in the book. He's self-absorbed, petty, and transactional with women. A man trying to coast on charm and music royalties without having earned anything of real worth. And then comes his mother and a woman who he sleeps with and then tosses away. That line, "You ain't no nice guy," oh man, it cuts through him like a blade. And it cuts through us too, because it's not just a rebuke. It's a diagnosis. Larry's charm is a mask, his ego is a crutch, and deep down he knows it. He wants to be a good person, but wanting isn't enough. Not yet. That's what makes Larry's arc so special. He doesn't start out good. He has to become good. And the path to that transformation is rocky, humbling, and often heartbreaking. Larry's story is a rare example of the true moral evolution in King's work. On his journey, he walks through loss, guilt, and fear until the man he wants to be starts to emerge from the wreckage of the man he was. And King doesn't rush this process. We watch Larry make mistake after mistake. He tries to hook up with a grieving woman. He flees from responsibility. He acts selfishly, repeatedly, even after the plague has wiped out most of humanity. But each step, it chips away at him. The guilt starts to take root. His decisions get harder. He starts listening more, leading less from ego and more from conscience. One of the most poignant aspects of Larry's growth is with his relationship with Rita Blakemore, the older woman he escapes New York with in the early days of the plague. Rita is depressed, traumatized, and fragile, and Larry doesn't know how to help her. He resents her. He feels trapped, and when she dies, he carries that guilt with him for the rest of the novel. That guilt becomes fuel, not for self-pity, but for change. Later, when Larry joins the Free Zone in Boulder, you can see that shift. He starts stepping up. He starts thinking about others and begins earning the trust that his mother never gave him. By the time we reach the novel's climax, Larry is no longer the man who took money from his mom's purse. He's the man who walks into Las Vegas knowing he's going to die, but going anyway, because someone has to bear witness. He doesn't fight Flagg. He doesn't overthrow the regime. He just shows up, tells the truth, and dies with dignity. It's a martyr's death, not in the explosive messianic sense, but in the humble human sense. He offers himself so that something better might grow in his place. That's what makes Larry's story so moving, because he never becomes perfect. He never gets his big hero moment. What he gets is something harder, redemption without reward. He gets a good death, a clean conscience, and a change to prove, not just to the world, but to himself, that he is a nice guy after all. Larry's arc reminds us that grace isn't granted, but rather it's earned. That growth is slow, painful, and real. That guilt, when held honestly, can become a compass. Out of all the characters in The Stand, Larry is the one, or at least one of the ones I think about most. Not because he saves the world, but because he saves himself. Mother Abagail is too often reduced to the archetype of the magical Negro, the wise black prophet who speaks with God and guides the chosen white few. But King complicates her. She's far more than just a guiding light. First off, yes, she is a prophet, a literal one. She receives visions, she speaks with God, and she becomes the spiritual leader of the Free Zone. But what sets her apart is that she's not just a mouthpiece for the divine. She's human, she's fallible, she doubts herself, she wrestles with pride. And those flaws matter, because they keep her from becoming just a cardboard saint. Mother Abigail's crisis of faith is a critical turning point in the novel. When she flees into the wilderness, it's not an act of mysticism, it's an act of shame. She's begun to enjoy her status as a prophet. She starts to think of herself as a star of the story, and that pride separates her from God. And what does she do? She disappears. She punishes herself with exile. Now, this is huge, because it shows us that even the holiest character in the book isn't immune to ego. And when she returns, frail and dying, she delivers one last prophecy. She names the 4 men who must journey to Las Vegas, and then she dies. She doesn't lead an army. She doesn't witness the final confrontation. She passes the torch to people who don't have her clarity, her certainty, or her power. And that's the point. Her faith was never about control. It was about trust. Abagail is a fusion of mythic and historical figures. She's part Moses, part Sojourner Truth, part Old Testament prophet. But she's also an elderly black woman in a nation that has historically ignored, erased, or villainized figures like her. Her survival through Captain Trips isn't just spiritual, it's also political. She represents a wisdom that the old world discarded, and in the new world, she becomes the cornerstone. Still, King walks a tightrope here. Mother Abagail flirts with the magical Negro trope, and modern readers rightfully critique this. She exists largely to serve the white protagonist's journey, and she dies right after delivering her final spiritual lesson. That pattern is troubling, especially given the long legacy of black characters in fiction being written as mythical helpers rather than fully realized people. But here's where King does some work to subvert that. Mother Abagail isn't just a voice of God. She's also a woman who's lived a long, hard life. She's been married, she's raised children, she's worked the land, she's sinned, and her sense of morality is rooted in a kind of Southern Baptist practicality that feels authentic, not necessarily mythic. She reads the Bible, yes, but she also cooks stew and sings hymns, and yells at people when they disappoint her. Mother Abagail and Flagg function as competing models of charisma. Flagg seduces through fear and ego, Abagail leads through humility and belief. But neither is entirely right. They both serve larger forces. They're both vehicles, and that ambivalence, that refusal to make her perfect, is what keeps her compelling. Even the way she dies, quietly surrounded by friends, it feels intentional. It's not martyrdom, it's not spectacle, it's transition. The novel shifts from prophecy to pilgrimage, from instruction to action, and that shift wouldn't work if she didn't first step aside. So is Mother Abagail a perfect character? No, but she is a powerful one. She embodies the tension at the heart of The Stand, the idea that goodness isn't always glamorous, that faith is a burden, that even prophets get tired. She's not there to save the world. She's there to remind us that it can still be saved. Harold Lauder's arc is one of King's most uncomfortable triumphs. It's not flashy, it's not supernatural, it's just deeply humanly horrifying. Because King doesn't write Harold as a monster, he writes him as us, as the kid you sat next to in 10th grade, the kid who always stared just a little bit too long, the one who was too smart, too isolated, and too angry, and never figured out how to be in the world. He starts the novel as a sympathetic outcast, socially awkward, ridiculed, overlooked. And yes, a teenage incel before the internet gave them a message board and a manifesto. Harold is a prototype of something we now recognize. The young man who believes the world owes him not just survival, but recognition. King gives us a front row seat to Harold's inner world, and it's a nauseatingly effective ride. You feel his self-loathing curdling into narcissism, his compulsive need to be seen as brilliant, as essential, as chosen. He's the type who rehearses facial expressions in the mirror, who rewrites conversations in his head to make himself profound, who turns every woman into an imagined conquest, and every man into a potential rival. And when the world ends, that's when Harold finds his chance. See, where most characters in The Stand lose everything and try to rebuild, Harold sees the apocalypse as a blank slate, a reroll, a divine do-over where he can finally become the person he thinks he is. Not the fat kid, not the weird loner, but Harold Emery Lauder. Genius, leader, man of destiny. And for a while, it almost works. He loses weight, he gains confidence, he puts on the mask. But that mask doesn't liberate him. It just calcifies his delusion. Because Harold doesn't want to grow. He wants to be adored. And when he doesn't get the validation he craves, especially from Frannie, it poisons him. Here's where it gets especially unsettling. King lets you empathize with Harold, at least at first. You see the bullying, the neglect, and the hunger to belong. But then you start to feel complicit, because you know where this is going. You've seen this all before. In school shooters, in stalkers, in Reddit rants. Harold's not just a character. He's a warning. He's a case study in radicalization. A walking commentary on what happens when entitlement meets apocalypse. See, Harold represents the dark side of the American dream. The belief that if you're just smart enough, driven enough, deserving enough, the world should revolve around you. And when it doesn't, you're justified in burning it down. And burn it down he does. Harold doesn't just betray Boulder. He bombs it. He writes a note afterwards, a pompous, self-aggrandizing declaration of genius and purpose, and then flees into the desert with Nadine, believing himself untouchable. He believes himself a dark messiah. But there's a twist. He's not untouchable. He's not even strong. Because when Flagg's world turns cold and real, Harold breaks. He crashes a motorcycle, gets injured, and watches Nadine slip away from him. And in the ruins of his delusion, he finally realizes what we've known all along. He was never the villain, just a patsy with a god complex. And so in one of the novel's most engrossing scenes, Harold puts a gun to his head and dies alone. There's no audience or applause, just the desert and the echo of his failures. King doesn't excuse Harold, nor does he redeem him, but he does give him the last shred of honesty. That final moment where Harold sees himself clearly, maybe for the first time in his life. And that's what makes his arc so powerful and so relevant. Because in 1978, Harold Lauder, he might have been fiction. Now, though, he's a documentary. He's the online radical who confuses cruelty for strength. The bitter dropout who decides to take as many people down with him as he can. The guy who thought he was the protagonist, but was really just a cautionary tale. So no, Harold isn't a cartoon villain. He's much worse. He's believable. If Harold Lauder is what bitterness becomes when it curdles into grievance, then Nadine Cross is what repression becomes when it's weaponized by prophecy. She walks through the stand like a ghost, elegant, enigmatic, and doomed. She's one of King's most tragic figures, not because she dies, but because she never really gets to live. At first glance, Nadine looks like the archetypal femme fatale. Dark hair, cold detachment, and dangerous allure. But King isn't playing pulp noir here. He's doing something subtler. Nadine isn't a seductress. She's a woman who has been promised to evil since childhood, and who has lived her entire life under the weight of that promise. She's not a temptress. She's the tempted. Nadine represents the psychological toll of spiritual coercion. Nadine's identity has been fractured by the internalized demand for purity, virginity, and submission to a higher and darker calling. She's been told since adolescence that she's saving herself, not for love, not for faith, but for Flagg. And that twisted sense of destiny, it corrupts every part of her life, including her relationships, her self-worth, and her agency. Sex in Nadine's arc is never about desire. It's about surrender. When she tries to form a human connection with Larry Underwood, she fails, but not because she lacks feeling, rather because she's too far gone. She wants Larry to save her, to pull her out of orbit, but he doesn't. He can't. And when she realizes that her last off-ramp has vanished, she resigns herself to what she believes is fate. That resignation isn't weakness. It's resistance that collapses. Nadine isn't simply corrupted by Flagg. She's groomed by him. She's lured with visions of power, importance, and motherhood. But when the moment comes, what she gets isn't divinity. It's violation. Flagg finally consummates their pact, and what follows is not erotic, not mystical. It's grotesque. She's impregnated, and the moment is marked by horror, revulsion, and the total erasure of Nadine's identity. She wanted transcendence. What she gets is possession. And she knows it. That's the turn. That's when Nadine realizes she's not a queen. She's a vessel. Not a chosen one, just used. And the second she understands this, she begins to fight back. But it's too late. Her rebellion is suicidal. Her power is gone. The only thing left that belongs to her is her end. She hurls herself off a balcony, taunting Flagg as she goes. And in that moment, broken and defiant, she becomes free. It's one of the only times in the novel when someone in Flagg's orbit escapes his control. Not through combat, but through refusal, through death. What makes Nadine's arc so haunting is how uncomfortable it is. She's not easy to like, she's manipulative, aloof, and at times even cruel. But underneath all that is a woman who was never allowed to be a person. She was marked by Flagg long before the story began. She's not seduced by evil. She was raised in its shadow. King doesn't ask us to pity Nadine, but he does ask us to understand her. To see that her downfall isn't a moral failure. It's a spiritual tragedy. She is a sacrificial virgin in a narrative that gives her no other script. She isn't allowed complexity, and so she burns from the inside out. In another novel, she might have been the villain's bride, his queen of hell. But in The Stand, she's something far sadder. She's a woman whose destiny was stolen, whose choices were manipulated, and who died trying, too late, to take them back. Now let's explore Lloyd Henreid, one of the most deceptively rich characters in The Stand. Often overshadowed by the more overtly charismatic figures like Flagg or the broken brilliance of Trashcan Man, Lloyd deserves a full analysis because he plays a critical role in embodying one of the novel's most uncomfortable truths. Evil doesn't always come banged or flamboyant. Sometimes it just says, "Yes, sir, Mr. Flagg." He's Flagg's right-hand man, his enforcer, his lapdog. But as with all the best characters in The Stand, Lloyd isn't simple. He isn't just a thug. He's a mirror reflecting the kind of person who doesn't dream of power, but accepts it when it's handed to him with a smirk and a steak dinner. Let's go back to an earlier scene. We see him locked in a prison cell, starving, slowly losing his mind, and surrounded by the half-eaten remains of his dead cellmate. The world has ended, the guards are gone, the food is gone. Lloyd is about to eat rats. And that's when Flagg appears. Not with fire, not with brimstone, just a key and a promise. And that's what makes Lloyd so chilling. He doesn't follow Flagg because he's evil. He follows him because Flagg saves him. He gives him food, he gives him purpose. Quite frankly, he gives him a job. Lloyd represents a blue-collar complicity with authoritarianism, which kind of hits a little too close to home in our current political climate. See, Lloyd isn't a mastermind. He's not driven by ideology. When Flagg finally arrives, he's just a guy who wants a warm bed, a steady gig, and someone to tell him what to do. What Flagg offers Lloyd isn't temptation. It's validation. It's a way out. And Lloyd takes it, grateful, loyal, and utterly incapable of seeing the bigger picture. He becomes Flagg's mouthpiece, his bureaucrat of brutality. He organizes executions, oversees punishments, and keeps the machine running. But here's the part that hits the hardest. He tries to do well. Lloyd wants to be good at being bad. He wears a suit, he memorizes protocol, he tries to be efficient. Hell, he even tries to be fair. He tries to keep order, but the order he maintains is built on crucifixions and surveillance. Lloyd Henreid is a man who repeatedly mistakes obedience for morality. And that's why King's portrayal of him is so important, because The Stand isn't just about good versus evil. It's about the people who get caught in between. By the time Trashcan Man shows up with the warhead, Lloyd is having doubts. You can see it. There's genuine fear in him. Not just of death, but of what they've become. He knows something is wrong, but he doesn't stop it. He can't. Because Flagg isn't just his boss. He's his savior. And you don't betray your savior even when the sky is burning. In one of the most subtle turns in the novel, Lloyd actually grows just a little more sympathetic as the end approaches. Is he still awful? Yeah, of course. This is the guy who was quick to murder in the beginning of the novel. But now he's scared and overwhelmed. He realizes he might have backed the wrong horse. But it's too late. That's what makes him one of the most realistic villains in the book. Lloyd is the banality of evil, Vegas edition. A man who wants to be competent, who's proud of his corner office in hell, who keeps the crucifixions on schedule. He's not evil in the way Flagg is. He's evil in the way that systems are evil. Efficient, apologetic, and always claiming they're just doing their job. And that's why he matters. Because in The Stand, not everyone chooses evil out of lust or rage. Some people choose it because they're hungry, scared, or alone. And some people, they choose it because there's a guy with a set of keys. Trashcan Man, the flame-worshipping arsonist, the nuclear pilgrim, the walking embodiment of chaos. He's one of King's most disturbing creations, but also one of his most symbolically rich. If Randall Flagg is entropy made charming, trash is destruction made sacred. On the surface, Trashcan Man is a pyromaniac, a schizophrenic outcast who finds purpose in lighting things on fire. He's the guy who sets oil tankers ablaze, who mutters, "My life for you," like a mantra, whose entire arc seems to be one long ignition sequence. But dig deeper, and you'll see that Trash isn't just a wild card. He's a prophet of annihilation. Trash is a symbol of trauma and self-obliteration. From a young age, he was beaten, humiliated, and institutionalized. His fixation on fire becomes both a coping mechanism and a form of spiritual ecstasy. It's how he purifies the world, how he makes it make sense again. Tony Magistral puts it this way: Trashcan Man is King's most powerful metaphor for madness in the wake of societal failure. He doesn't just burn things because he likes the flames. He burns them because it's the only language he's ever known. Because fire, unlike people, it has rules. What makes Trash so tragic is that he's not malicious. He's devoted. He wants to serve. He wants to matter. And in Flagg, he sees someone who finally sees him back. My life for you isn't loyalty. It's worship. It's surrender. It's the ultimate broken soul finding what he believes is a divine purpose. But here's the horror. Flagg doesn't love Trashcan Man. He uses and manipulates him, enables his destruction without offering any real redemption. And Trash, so desperate for meaning, drags a nuclear warhead across the desert like it's an offering to a god who never deserved it. In that moment, when Trash returns to Vegas, half dead, irradiated, still whispering my life for you, and presents the warhead like a sacrament, that's one of the most harrowing scenes in the entire novel. It's beautiful and grotesque. It's spiritual fervor weaponized into apocalypse. It's also not a coincidence that Trash triggers the novel's second apocalypse, because Trash at this point is the apocalypse. He's what happens when a person is so thoroughly broken by the world that they become a vessel for its destruction. His final act, whether you view it as divine retribution or blind madness, is what wipes the slate clean. In that sense, he's both martyr and executioner. Some readers want to put Trash into a neat category. Is he evil? Is he just crazy? Is he a victim? But the better answer is, he's a sacred contradiction. He's not chaotic evil. He's chaotic wounded. A lost child in a burning adult's body. A symbol of how trauma twists faith into fanaticism, how loneliness curdles into loyalty, and how sometimes the most terrifying characters are the ones who are trying to be good. Even his name is loaded. The Trashcan Man. He calls himself garbage before anyone else can. He sees himself as disposable, even sacrificial. And in the end, that's exactly what he becomes. The real heartbreak of Trash is that no one ever tries to save him. They pity him, they use him. But they never embrace him like Nick embraces Tom Cullen. No one gives him the chance to believe that he's worth more than the fire he sets. And maybe if someone had, Las Vegas may not have ended. Randall Flagg, the walking dude, the dark man, the smiler with a knife. He's not just in the novel, he haunts it. He stalks its pages like a bad dream in cowboy boots. And in The Stand, Flagg doesn't just emerge as a memorable villain. He becomes iconic. This is his full-scale debut, his coming-out party in the Kingverse, and is nothing short of mythic. Flagg is evil, but not in the cartoonish, cackling supervillain sense. He's more primal than that, more American. Flagg is a charismatic fascist, the embodiment of what happens when totalitarianism dresses itself in denim and a devilish grin. He doesn't impose control, he offers it. He doesn't conquer with armies. He walks up, tilts his head, and whispers, "You've been wronged. Let me help you make it right." And that's what makes him so dangerous. Flagg doesn't force people to do evil. He frees them to do what they already secretly want to do. He turns permission into damnation. He sells obedience as empowerment. And those who serve him, Lloyd, Nadine, the citizens of Vegas, they aren't brainwashed. They're liberated. They feel seen. But what's he really after? Not justice, not vengeance, not even chaos exactly. Flagg is entropy with a brand strategy. He doesn't want to burn the world down. He wants to build something sleek and sharp and hollow atop its ruins. Vegas isn't an orgy of violence. It's a machine. It's efficient and clean and terrifyingly orderly. It runs on fear, but it looks like success. And that's the important part, because Flagg's Vegas is not simply a dictatorship. It's a theocracy of fear, and one that reflects the dangers of charismatic authoritarianism. He doesn't force people to follow him. He makes them want to, and that's far more dangerous. Flagg is the guy who would buy you a beer, laugh at your jokes, and then have you crucified for doing something he suggests. And you'd almost understand why. That's the brilliance of King's depiction. You get the appeal of evil. You feel the seduction. Flagg isn't just malevolent, he's magnetic. He walks through dreams, he reshapes nightmares, and promises safety in exchange for submission. He's not just a villain, he's an archetype. He's Lucifer, he's Loki, he's Mephistopheles. But he's also modern. He wears jeans, he quotes rock lyrics, he uses walkie-talkies. He isn't just ancient evil, he's updated for mass consumption. And structurally, Flagg isn't just a plot driver. He's a spiritual barometer. When characters move toward him, they're not just joining the bad side, they're surrendering to their worst instincts. Harold, Nadine, Lloyd, Trashcan Man, these people don't just fall, they're invited. And Flagg doesn't corrupt them, he enables them. Well, he does corrupt Nadine. What's terrifying is how little we know about him. Even King doesn't pin him down. In his author notes, he refers to Flagg as a force who wears human flesh like a disguise. And in later books, The Eyes of the Dragon and the Dark Tower series, Flagg pops up again and again, but sometimes with different names and always the same grin. He's King's walking embodiment of recurring evil, of temptation that never dies. He's the American devil, more charming than fire and brimstone Satan, more plausible than horror movie monsters. He could be a politician, a cult leader, your new boss. He's what happens when evil stops hiding and starts handing out business cards. There's a powerful comparison to be made between Flagg and Judge Holden of Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. Both are agents of chaos cloaked in charisma. Both speak in riddles, both attract followers with promises of clarity in a world gone mad. But where Holden is cold and intellectual, Flagg is electric and instinctual. He makes you want to follow him, and then he lets you ruin yourself in the process. And when Trashcan Man finally returns to Vegas, ragged, trembling, and radioactive, and then lays the nuclear warhead at Flagg's feet like a twisted Eucharist, Flagg's spell breaks, not because he's overthrown, but because the chaos he invited finally turns on him. The smile cracks, the mask slips, and what's left isn't the devil. It's a scared little man who's lost control of the monster he helped create. So yeah, Flagg is more than just the villain of The Stand. He's the shadow of America. He's the smile behind the throne, the voice in the static, the man at the crossroads offering you a deal you already wanted to make. And worst of all, he'll be back. No review of The Stand is complete without talking about the pacing and the ending. This book is long, like biblical long. We're talking close to 1,200 pages in the uncut edition, and not all of it sings. The first third, it's brilliant and propulsive. Watching the world collapse under Captain Trips is one of the best extended opening acts in genre fiction. The No Great Loss chapter is King at his most sardonic and surgical. It's one of my favorite chapters in all of literature. But then you hit the middle. The Boulder Free Zone chapters, the town meetings, the bylaws, the power grid discussions, it's not bad, but it is a different novel. The urgency fades. The apocalypse turns into a city council drama. Some people love this stretch. Others get bogged down. Personally, I think King wanted to show how hard hope is, how boring, fragile, and contentious rebuilding can be. Evil is sexy. Goodness requires paperwork. And then there's the ending. Yes, this is the part that either breaks the novel for some readers or sends it soaring into the clouds like the hand of God itself. After hundreds of pages of dreams, journeys, committees, and confrontations, we arrive in Las Vegas. Our remaining heroes, Larry, Ralph, and later Stu, though he's separated from the group, have come not with weapons, but with conviction. They aren't there to assassinate Flagg. They aren't commandos. They're pilgrims, offering themselves as witnesses. They're martyrs who come bearing the moral weight of the Boulder Free Zone, and they're ready to die if need be. And then just as Flagg is tightening his grip on Vegas, just as the gathered crowd is teetering on the edge of full-throated fascist worship, Trashcan Man arrives. Now he's been gone for a while, wandering the wastelands, muttering my life for you like a broken prayer. And what does he bring back? A nuclear warhead dragged across the desert as an offering to Flagg. That's when the real climax hits, in the form of a literal hand of God, a glowing divine manifestation that detonates the warhead and vaporizes Flagg's entire regime. Evil is purged. Judgment is rendered, Boulder is spared. And just like that, it's over. The Stand's climax isn't a battle. It's a cleansing. A moment of divine reckoning so literal, so Old Testament, it still startles readers who have spent 1,000 pages in a world that despite its supernatural edges, feels intensely grounded. Now, here's where the critical debate kicks in. On one side, you have those who argue this is Deus Ex Machina in its purest form. The gods descend, wave their cosmic hand, and resolve the narrative. Characters don't get to act, the bomb isn't disarmed, Flagg isn't confronted. Instead, King seems to say, this is it. This is enough. And it can feel like a cheat, like we've been robbed of a proper reckoning between the characters and the chaos they've endured. But there's another reading, and honestly, it's the one that I lean toward. Because once you read The Stand as a spiritual epic, a modern book of Exodus, the divine intervention doesn't feel like an escape. It feels like judgment. It feels like the moment where the narrative leaves the personal and enters the archetypal. This isn't about Larry or Ralph or even Flagg anymore. It's about the world, about sin and grace, and what must be burned away to make room for rebirth. The Stand has been described as a revelation allegory for the post-nuclear age, one where faith and sacrifice are the real weapons of resistance. The ending, with its fiery obliteration of sin and its mysterious divine actor, is a culmination of that metaphor, not a betrayal. Larry's arc is key here. Larry Underwood doesn't die trying to fight Flagg. He dies as a witness. He and Ralph offer their lives in the hope that truth, love, and something greater might intervene. Their deaths are acts of faith, not strategy. And it's that surrender, not a bullet, that breaks Flagg's spell. They walk into Vegas knowing they can't win. And in their very powerlessness, the narrative opens a space for grace. Flagg's ending too, it's fascinating. He doesn't die. Not really. He disappears. And in the epilogue, we find him again, reborn somewhere far away, seducing a new society with the same smile. King is saying evil doesn't vanish. It restarts and finds new soil. It always does. But back to the Hand of God. It's controversial because it's audacious. It throws out traditional plot resolutions in favor of a mystical theater. In a more secular novel, it wouldn't work. But in The Stand, the divine has been whispering in dreams since page 1. The entire story is predicated on prophecy, faith, and spiritual warfare. So when God shows up, literally, it's not out of nowhere. It's the end of a long, slow burn. Still, I get it. It's a lot. It asks you to believe that mystery is the point, that the ending isn't clean because life isn't clean, that Flagg's destruction doesn't come through heroism or violence, but through surrender and sacrifice. It asks you to view this not as a climax, but as a purging fire. And maybe most subversively, it denies us catharsis. We don't get to see Boulder celebrate. We don't get to watch society flourish. Instead, we're given one last quiet journey. Stu and Tom's slow return across the broken country. The trek home, the long walk back to whatever future still exists. And then the novel ends, not with fireworks, but with Frannie and Stu looking at their newborn child, wondering if humanity has learned anything at all. And Frannie's line, it hits like a quiet bomb. Do we ever learn? That's the question The Stand leaves us with. Not who won, but what did we become? Because at its core, The Stand isn't about apocalypse. It's about aftermath. Not about destroying evil, but about the effort it takes to rebuild good. And if God's hand wipes the slate clean, we're still the ones holding the chalk. So, is The Stand good? Yes. Deeply, frustratingly, messily, and profoundly. It's flawed in ways that make it feel more real, not less. Its characters feel lived in, its world feels dangerous, its ideas about faith, power, fear, and community, they all matter. It's not perfect, but it's unforgettable. And in the end, that's a better legacy than perfection anyway. Now, should you read it? If you've made it this far into the video, first, I have to give you your flowers. I know this is a long one. Second, you probably already have your answer. But let me be clear. You absolutely should read The Stand. but you should also know what you're getting into. This isn't your average horror novel. It's not a quick weekend read. This is Stephen King going full Tolkien apocalypse mode, a slow burn that demands your time, your attention, and your willingness to wrestle with big, thorny questions. It's a novel about a deadly plague, yeah, but it's more about what comes after. What happens when civilization collapses and the spiritual scaffolding underneath everything is suddenly exposed. If you're a fan of post-apocalyptic fiction, this is essential reading. It's one of the genre's defining texts, right up there with The Road, Earth Abides, and A Canticle for Leibowitz. But what sets The Stand apart is how intimately it focuses on people. Not just in how they survive, but who they become when everything else is stripped away. If you're someone who enjoys character-driven epics, where the plot emerges from the choices people make under pressure, this will hit like a freight train. In many ways, The Stand is a keystone novel. It links to other stories. It resonates outward. So if you're planning on tackling the Dark Tower with me into my Into the Kingverse series, you owe it to yourself to read this first. What you won't find here is neatness. The book is messy in places, by design and sometimes by accident. The ending won't satisfy everyone. Some characters vanish from the spotlight, some threads go unresolved, but for all its imperfections, The Stand is rich, ambitious, and filled with humanity. It's a story that has something to say about the world, and it says it through ordinary people facing impossible choices. So if you're in the mood for something big, something that's equal parts end-of-the-world thriller, spiritual parable, road novel, and character study, this book will give back everything you put into it. It's not a casual read, but it is a deeply rewarding one. Back in 2005, The Stand was my first Stephen King novel, and it was instrumental in getting me back into reading. This is one of those towering works that casts a long shadow, not just across King's bibliography, but across modern horror and speculative fiction as a whole. Reading it cover to cover, it feels like finishing a literary pilgrimage. Even when The Stand stumbles, it never loses its weight. Even when it wanders, it still matters. The characters have stayed with me for a long time. Nick, Larry, Flagg, Tom Cullen, Frannie, Stu, Harold, hell, even Trashcan Man. These aren't just pieces in a plot. They're people I traveled with, people I cared about, and that's rare, or, at least it is for me. And beyond the plot and characters, the book lingers because of its ideas about faith and fear, about the fragility of society and the resilience of the human spirit. It's about how evil doesn't always come with horns and flames. Sometimes it comes wearing a smile and cowboy boots. And it's about how goodness, real goodness, isn't flashy. It's quiet, it's hard, and it perseveres. Reading The Stand is a commitment. It's a journey. But for those of you willing to take the first step, those of you curious about what remains after the world ends and what might be built from its ashes, there's something powerful waiting for you in these pages. So tell me in the comments, have you read The Stand? What did you love? What didn't work for you? And if you haven't read it yet, are you planning to? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends, family, and even your enemies. Just nobody wearing a smiley face pin on their breast pocket. And of course, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button because every subscriber inches me one step closer to taking over the galaxies. Until next time, take care, keep reading, and I'll see you in the next one.